Welcome back to part 2 of my interview with Dr. Manatt. Today on the Undeveloped story, we will be discussing history's relevance and usage in the classroom and in society.
You shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
History is a narrative science, and time is something that has to be interpreted by the present. With him, I like what he's saying with history as being a science, and he was in his argument for that is not just literature. It's not just something you read and you describe emotions with it, but it's something you have to go deeper into. You have to analyze, and you have to pull stuff out of it and use it to influence stuff in the present. With part of his argument on that, with history being a science. But I was wondering what you think about it.
Yes, and I think he's not trying to argue that it's a hard science like physics or biology. I think what he means when he says narrative science is it's a way of knowing. Scientia is this Latin word meaning wisdom and knowledge. Like a combination of wisdom and knowledge, and so it's a way for people to understand what happened in the past, right? That's the science of it. It's a way for us to understand, to some extent what happened in the past. Mm-hmm. And it's a narrative science in the sense that you cannot break it down into formulas. You can't break it down into pure statistics. It's a way of speaking about what happened and describing what happened in the past.
Yeah. He uses some of the examples of like physics, like some of the hard sciences, but he uses them as examples of like how they have their own style of doing stuff. They have their own understanding. They have their own language, words, and everything else. And there's no reason that history shouldn't be able to have its own style with narration as well, and its understanding of everything.
I agree.
Yeah.
And that's going to be different than pure fiction, right?
Right.
Even though lots of what people write as history ends up being, quite a bit of fiction. It's certainly legitimate to have its own jargon and its own, ritual ways of going about it. I think that's totally legitimate.
Yeah, I would, like I said, I definitely agree. And then it kind of goes to the second part of my question. Then is it something that has to be interpreted by the present?
Well, I think that it can only be interpreted by the present because the only people that are able to interpret history are the people that are alive at the moment, right?
Yeah. And people are alive in the moment aren't the people that were in that moment in the past, so you have to evaluate it as somebody who's never actually there.
Yeah, and then you get the weird middle ground situation where you have, say, a veteran of the Iraq War, right? And you've got somebody who's decided to write the history of and I'm talking about the second Gulf War in 2003. Today in 2017, you've got somebody who's interviewing a bunch of veterans of the Iraq War and, officers and civilians who lived through it and all this kind of stuff. But they didn't live through it, right? They are informing our understanding of what actually happened when the people who actually maybe understand better are either, can they move on with their lives and go on and sell real estate or, they're not historians, right? Mm-hmm. These are the people that actually lived through the Iraq War were Iraqis and U.S. soldiers and foreign fighters that came to Iraq to fight the infidel United States. You know, so that's a weird situation where you actually have people that are alive that understand, in many cases, much better than the historian what actually happened, and yet they're not being consulted. I mean, they are being consulted, but it's ultimately this detached person that hasn't necessarily really experienced it firsthand who ends up producing the authoritative account of what actually happened.
Just the fact that they actually did have that experience makes it an important account still. Even though it's not maybe a technical account because it wasn't written by a historian, just by the fact alone that they were in the event makes their account extremely worthwhile and extremely valuable, I think, to the historian.
Oh yeah, it does. But the irony is that's the rare case, right, where you actually have people alive that experience the event that's being described by a historian. Mm-hmm. In most cases, it is Tyler Smith in 2017 going back and trying to understand what happened in 1789, and everybody who was alive in 1789 is long dead.
Yeah,
and it's just Tyler Smith sitting there with wrestling with all of these different interpretations of what happened in the French Revolution, trying to make sense of it.
You go back to it's getting interpreted again by what's going on in the present. So,
then we're on to question number 3.
Yeah.
Misunderstanding the present is the inevitable consequence of ignoring the past, but a man may wear himself out just as fruitlessly in seeking to understand the past if he's totally ignorant of the present. I mean, and I agree with that very much so, or almost entirely agree with that, because it's very hard if the person is totally disengaged from the present and is just passionate about the 14th century in, Hungary, right? Mm-hmm. Well, they may know a ton about the 14th century in Hungary, but they are not going to know what people in the 21st century would be interested to learn about the 14th century Hungary, right?
Yeah, that's the key. One of the key things, I think, is you have to be aware of the present just alone and presenting your past. Otherwise, you're just going to be spinning wheels and wasting time doing something that nobody wants to hear, nobody wants to listen to, and people are just going to be tuning you out for something else. But if you're aware of what's going on in the present, you can utilize that. And I think it goes back to the feminist idea or or maybe civil rights ideas that are going on too. And it's like, well, okay, these are big ideas. If we evaluate these a little bit more and focus on these, we can use them to learn something new, to promote something new, and there will be something that's extremely relevant to what's going on right now.
So you could sit there and say, well, I'm going to tell you about medieval history, and you could go on and on and on about alchemy, books upon books about how to create gold out of base metals. And you would just, I do this naturally. I put my listeners to sleep just, as a talent. But, you'd really put them to sleep if you were doing something that was so foreign and so uninteresting and so not what people are passionate about today.
Yeah. And I feel like that's one of my challenges I found this year in my classroom is trying to talk about Constitution, early U.S. history, like right there on 1800s, some of the stuff that the European history, and trying to get the students to realize this is important in some ways. And I'm trying to evaluate it. Where can I focus on something that will grab the students, be truth, and promote the idea of what's going on in history without having them fall asleep. There's been a few times this year I've been talking and I'm excited about what I'm talking about. And it's like, this is amazing. And then I look over and I see somebody falling asleep.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. I'm sorry. Welcome to the life of teaching history. But, I think you're doing the right thing by saying, okay, well, if I'm not interesting them or large portion, you're always going to have someone who's going to fall asleep for one reason. Their sports practice was really hard, or they were up really late, or, what. But, when you see that the large portion of the class is disengaged, well, then you need to sort of adjust your approach. The narrative science, part of the art, it's the book, The Craft of History, is to try to interest people in the subject that you think is fascinating as well. 90% interested, or 90% of your interest level is not going to be met by most, but if you can get the students 20% as interested interested in a topic as you are, well, then that, I think, is maybe possibly quite successful.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is then, we're on to question 4, which is how does that connect to the classroom? How do we connect it to the classroom? And I think it is that you have to be attached to the present and know what your students are passionate about to have a chance to identify the things where you would have overlap, where it's an area that you have passion for and they have passion for, and is also, viewed generally as an important part of the curriculum, right? Because if all of the students are really passionate about something that you're really passionate about, but it has nothing to do with the curriculum that you're assigned to teach, well, that's a problem too.
Yeah. And I've been looking around, and we recently just had a afternoon where we talked about it, and something I might want to look into is I'm having students do a worksheet that breaks down a document, basically like the AP Hippos for other documents, but I'm doing that with my other classes as well. With it, I'm like, well, you're learning how to analyze a document, how to break it down and everything. And I was thinking, how can I connect that? How does that connect to the present? And I'm thinking, well, maybe I could connect it to modern day speeches, recent things that have happened, and how you can analyze them and understand it better, and maybe not take everything just at face value. One thing that I want to see if I can do is maybe take something from Donald Trump and take one of his speeches and put it down as text form so you can actually read it, break it down, the same way you do everything else. Yeah. Yeah, no, good luck. But at the same time, I'd like to see what would happen with it. And it might be where it would challenge them to at least think critically about it instead of just saying, oh, hey, this is society says this, so I'm going to agree with the society and just say all this crap about them. No, I need to actually, if I'm not going to agree with something, I need to be informed and recognize how I don't agree with it and what would be wrong with it. So I'm connecting the past, but at the same time, I'm using my skills that I've learned from studying the past and evaluating what's going on in the present.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I definitely think you can do that in a government class very successfully. You can probably, what would be very interesting to do is if you would take a transcript of Trump and one of his rally speeches, and then, take a transcript of Hillary's speech and go, okay, well, these are transcripts, and you look at it and you read through this and you say, wow, that Trump has all sorts of grammatical errors, his sentences are incomplete, his thoughts don't necessarily always make sense. Why is he connecting more than Hillary? What explains that? And then you say, okay, well, now that we've read it in text, let's see a video transcript or, a video production to events and see why maybe what is in the written word is not necessarily the most important thing. Maybe, seeing his, Trump's interaction with the crowd and his ability to be flexible and adapt his message to what he sees going on in the crowd is maybe what explains him being able to connect better than the well-crafted and perfectly careful Hillary Clinton speech.
Yeah.
So then we come to the last question, which is what are historical facts and how confident can we be in those facts? There were pyramids that were built at a certain point in time. That's a fact because we have evidence that those things exist. How and why and, how they were built and why they were built and the role that they played in Egyptian society, that is going to be subject to a lot of debate. Can't recreate that situation. And you can look at the few sources that are left and you can come up with a lot of different ideas. And so there are verifiable facts and there are harder to verify facts.
So if you go all the way back in time then, say to Herodotus or Thucydides, how much do you think that we could actually rely upon those particular people, and how confident can we be in what they say? Can we even trust what they say as historical facts, do you think, if we go all the way back like that, or do you think it's a lot more subjective? The misunderstanding of the present is the inevitable consequence of ignoring the past.
I think it's very subjective, but I think one thing you can say, Thucydides, I love Thucydides, by the way, is that whether the speeches that he made up and put in the mouth of Pericles and all these other actors what actually was ever stated. One fact you can draw from it is that the Greeks liked speeches.